Welcome to the EdTechTeacher Podcast. My name is Brandon Hall. I am pleased to be joined today by Tom Driscoll. Tom is the CEO of EdTechTeacher. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, Brandon. I'm really excited to launch this new podcast series. It's been something that we've been thinking about for years now, and we're just so excited to have this come to fruition. And thanks so much for taking the lead on this.
It's been really exciting working with you and learning about the work from EdTechTeacher, mainly to help teachers, right?
Right, that's been the whole point. Is that our company's about helping teachers in the classroom. How can we help them thrive, whether it's with educational technologies or instructional practices? We're just trying to meet them where they're at. We've always been about that, and we just feel like having a podcast is going to provide us with an opportunity to share, tips and tricks around EdTech, but also stories from the field. We work with schools across the country, even some internationally, so we can share some of the experiences that we've had out there, but also to give them a platform. So part of this podcast is going to be a space where we can interview. I'm going to have guest experts from across the world that are educators, school leaders, and just to be able to share that perspective, I think is going to be really valuable for everyone in our EdTech teacher community.
Yeah, and you've been sort of up and down the East Coast, from East Coast to West Coast and all over the world. I guess this is a hard question to ask, but which teachers have you found to be the most engaged?
It's the ones that really care about improving their craft, right? It's about not just about technology, it's about being a better teacher. And those are the people that tend to gravitate towards EdTech teacher, right? Is that it's about how do we help kids? How do we help ourselves be better teachers? And that could also be just from a work-life balance part of it. It could be, how do we handle stressful situations in the classroom? So really, what are the challenges that teachers face? And we like to work with those that are like, all right, we address those challenges. What can we do to make things better? And those tend to be the most engaged with any of our workshops. But also just in general, it's people that live the idea of teaching is about learning, right? You really can't be an effective teacher unless you continually learn and enhance and improve your craft. And those tend to be the educators that gravitate towards our products and services, because that's our goal, is to try to help people enhance their craft and become better at teaching.
Yeah, and as the podcast goes, where do you see the podcast fitting into that mission?
I think part of it is going to be about also helping folks connect and network. And it's interesting, when I first threw these headphones on to get on this episode with you, I actually had a flashback to about maybe 12 years ago. I was first getting into this new concept called the flipped classroom, this brand new idea. And I was following John Bergman and Aaron Sams, and they were super helpful. I just connected with them through Twitter. And then I found some social studies teachers that were interested in flipping their class, and Google Hangouts, as it was called, right? It was a new thing, Google Hangouts. And I had these big clunky headphones, and we hopped on. I was just talking with these four, to me, random history teachers from across the country about how to flip our classes with instructional videos. And it hit me there. It's like, this is not about tech. It's about sharing stories, connecting with other educators that are in your tribe, right? That are in your wheelhouse. And that's what really got me interested in not just ed tech, but the ability to network and connect with teachers from all over the world, partly through educational technologies. But it's about those connections and relationships. So part of this podcast is we want folks to not just listen in and get tips and ideas, but also connect with others, like follow up with some of our guests, make them part of your professional learning network. And we've also found that some of the social networks that we relied on maybe 5-10 years ago to connect are changing, they're shifting. And I, for one, find that podcasts are great. I listen to them all the time. I learn a ton from them. So we find that this format can also help reach more people, right? So where the days of going on a Twitter chat on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday night, like those days might be kind of gone. But I think the idea of podcasting is still a great way to quickly learn and connect with people from around the country that share your interests.
Yeah, and there aren't too many people that are working from home now that are teachers, right. So they've got to commute somehow, and why not listen to us, right?
Right. Why not? I mean, we're going to try to keep these episodes, to a commute drive, or if you like to run, you like to jog. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm doing yard work or, just going for a quick run, or you're walking your dog. So in those spaces in between, we know educators' time is extremely valuable. So if we can create more opportunities to learn, and we can share our ideas with you in different formats, we're all for it.
Yeah, and the structure of the podcast, as far as that goes, starting with a introduction of the guest and talking, maybe about some things that are in the news coming up in education, and then an interview, 15 or 20-minute structured interview with that particular guest. And then at the very end, some of the things that are happening in the EdTech teacher world.
Yeah, so that's how we're going to structure these. We'll always start each episode with, some strategies, tips, resources that we'd like to share. Typically, it'll be things that we've been working with schools across the country on, but also we have a lot of partners that we work with. So we're official education partners with Adobe, with Google, Microsoft, Newsela. So as updates come across our desk, right, on how to share with our audience, we're going to share those as well. So for instance, today, just as a quick teaser tip, we're not going to do a full segment on it, but one thing that we've been working with Google on quite a bit has been some of their new features that they've been putting into Google Workspace. Like just for instance, yesterday I was working with a school on some of the new features with interactive video questions and practice sets. And there's a lot of exciting new changes that are coming very soon. So this is a space where we'll spend a few minutes at the beginning of each podcast. What are those new updates? What are those new features? What are some things that you can practically implement in your class? And then we will switch towards an expert interview where we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes to dig in with experts in the field, teachers, school leaders, basically anybody that we've been connecting with that has interesting stories to share. We'll have a chance to dive in with them. And then we'll finish up each podcast too with not just some resources that we're sharing and programs we're running, but also we'll have some promotions for podcast listeners. So even today, we're going to run a special for folks that listen to our podcast and become audience members. We're going to have some special perks for you guys as well.
Perfect. So let's get into our interview.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So you got into education. You obviously go through your schooling. What led you to choose a career in education?
Well, like many teachers, I was from an educator family. So my dad was an educator. He's a high school. Actually, no, he's an elementary teacher for about 30 years. So I actually was in his class when I was in fourth grade. So,
oh, wow.
I'm from an educator family. My aunts were educators. My mom was a teacher assistant for years. And what I find so fascinating is that in the 90s, right, she was, and you may remember that for the folks that went to school in the 90s, she was the computer cart person, right? So she would come down on Fridays and she'd have her computer cart and she'd bring it in, and we'd all get a turn to either play. It was either Math Blasters or like Oregon Trail, or one of those things.
Yeah.
Some of the classics from the 90s. Eventually, when I got to middle school, it was all about Carmen Sandiego, right? I was learning my geography through that. But that it's from an early age that got me interested in like how could technology become part of this equation too. It was interesting. I went to become a social studies teacher, and all of my undergrad was on history and social studies. And it wasn't until my master's I started to get back into the ed tech. But it's always been something I've been interested in is how can we leverage technology in different ways in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think so often we tell our students that sometimes what you're going to school for is not what you're going to end up becoming. That there are careers that are going to develop as technology and time go on that weren't even thought of when you were in school. And I talk to a lot of people and say that the technology course that I took in my undergrad program in the late 90s, early 2000s was basically like how to use a projector, how to use the overhead. They had this a book, the document camera that could pick up color. That was a big deal.
Right.
And that was our ed tech at the time. And I developed a website for students to go when they were at home and check what the homework was.
Right.
And that was like my big piece of my student teaching portfolio. Nobody else was doing that at the time, but it was, it wasn't crazy coding or anything that was involved, but that was sort of my foray into ed tech, right? In 2002, student teaching.
Right. Yeah. At the early start of this, right? So when one-to-one computing was first getting started, I found the big shift that got me more interested in it was when, the term for it was Web 2.0, right? But the whole idea was that you don't just go to the internet to look at stuff. You're actually doing things online. Now we take it for granted, but I remember my second or third year teaching, I created this thing called a Wikispaces website. And if you remember Wikispaces, right? But it was the whole idea is I created a class website, but other than the class websites in my school where you just put a couple links to lesson plans on a clunky homepage, the kids would actually go in and design the website with us as part of the projects. And back then, in like 2008, that was a big deal. Like the ability to go in and change something on a website collectively as a whole group, that was not normal. So that was the first time I was like, wow, this can be more of like a tool for like community, for active engagement, not just. And I'll be the first to admit, my first year teaching, I was so excited because I took what I used to write on the board with the notes and I made PowerPoint slides, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I had one of the only projectors in the school, so people would come in and say, hey, let's watch Tom do his slides. And that was like an innovative ed tech thing. Now it's like
Hmm.
we see that in the classroom, like, oh, how can we do less of that, right?
Yeah,
So it's
right,
amazing on
right,
how
right, right.
quickly that's changed. But if you remember at that time, like literally the mode of instruction in the school for most of the teachers was you just turn your back to the class and you're writing on the board for probably half of your day. Which, if we think back at it now, like that is crazy. But that
Hmm.
wasn't that long. That was only 20 years ago. Most of the teachers in the high school I worked at had their back to the classroom as they wrote on the board. That is to me like, so some people say ed tech hasn't had too much of an impact. I think in some ways it really has. I mean, we have changed our mindsets as educators quite a bit over the past 20 to 25 years. So as much as we're opposed to just being the cheerleaders for tech and the irrational exuberance around it, like we're the first ones to say that that is not always the case.
Hmm.
There has been a lot of positive change over the past decade or two, and I've seen it. I've seen it in schools that I've worked in. I've seen it in my kids' classes, schools I've been around. There has been a lot of positive impact, I think, on just instructional design and what we think our role as educators should be.
Yeah. So would you say that your tipping point for ed tech was kind of that beginning point where you started doing the PowerPoint slides, and we
Yeah.
think now about the Sammer model, right?
Yeah. Right.
Think that today that would be substitution. A substitute for lecturing would be to do the PowerPoint, but back then
Right.
that was redefinition.
Right. That was a very innovative approach at that
Yeah.
point. And then the idea of smart boards where you could interact and touch them.
Right.
The biggest failure of smart boards was that kids weren't allowed to use them. Right. So what an incredible waste of an opportunity for about a decade we have. But now schools that get interactive whiteboards, or at least the ones that do it well, they design it as a tool for everybody.
Hmm.
It's a tool for teachers, it's a tool for kids, it could be a collaborative learning space, right? So but back then we would go up to the smart board and we would write a digital circle around a number, and we think it was like amazing, like wow, this is game changing. It didn't do anything different. Now it's just a circle around a number, um but it was a starting point. It got people to start thinking about, hey, maybe we should take all these do not touch signs down from the smart boards and
Yeah.
like actually
Right.
have kids use them and,
Right.
and make it a collaborative tool. Then once one-to-one computing entered, that whole concept kind of shifted because kids have devices in front of them now. But
Right.
that's just one example of how in a very short amount of time, I think there has been a change in mindset for a lot of teachers, not all, but a lot of them that have been moving in that direction towards, more student-centered activities, getting kids active and engaged, having them use the technology in class. If anything now, one of the things that I see in schools is that there can be an over-reliance a bit on those workflows. And I think that part of the equation is not about the amount of ed tech you use and the amount of student use. It's the quality of it and what is the impact on teaching and learning. I had
Without
that
a doubt.
I had that conversation yesterday, and sometimes we'll go into a school, and admittedly, we'll have some folks in there that do not want any part of this. Like they're like, we don't want any more tech. We want less tech. And the first thing I say is like, I agree. And they're like, what? Like you're supposed to be, telling us all about the ed tech. And I'm like, yes, about effective use of it, not how much you use it. Right. So I think that's something that a lot of districts now are facing, is that a lot of teachers are using it, a lot of students are using it, but we're quickly realizing that there are not all tasks need to be done digitally on a computer, on a Chromebook, through Google Classroom. A conversation, frankly, is better for kids sometimes. Just sit down, close your devices, look someone in the eye, and talk. That's something that kids need help with more than looking up things on Google Drive. So I think it's that balance of figuring out how can we um, make the best use of ed tech without thinking that it's about volume, because it's not about volume, it's about effective use of it.
Yeah. And as far as um, the sort of kind of lost my train of thought here. This will be part of the edit.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about like turn this now into stuff about EdTechTeacher.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as your work at EdTechTeacher goes, you go into these classrooms, you go into schools, and you give keynotes and you have conversations one-on-one and in large groups and in small groups with people. But what would you say is the sort of what drove you to that? What had you leave the classroom and then start to like actually coach other teachers?
Yeah, I felt it was probably my eighth year teaching. I started to share some of my strategies that I was doing with blended learning in the flipped classroom, and I started to network and meet other folks that specialized in professional development. Some of them were here in Rhode Island, where I live, but then just connecting with other ed tech professional development companies around the country, and I really loved the work that we're doing. And EdTechTeacher gave me a shot. I loved a lot of the workshops they've been doing. They actually started back in 2003. So they've been around for a while, especially in the New England area. I had been to a lot of their conferences and events, and I just loved the work that they did. And I'm like, I want to help teachers like this too. And it feels good. It's having an impact. So I actually started doing some consulting with EdTechTeacher, but I moved to the Bristol Warren Regional School District in Rhode Island, and I was their digital learning director for 6 years. And there I actually had an official role where I could work with a group of, it was around 20 to 30 teachers a year, where we got to experiment in the classroom. And I loved that. It was all about rapid, short cycle action research projects, 8 to 10 weeks. Try out a strategy, try out a tool, see if it works, and then keep rolling. And I just loved that work. So then in 2021 to 2022, I transitioned over to full-time at EdTechTeacher. And since then, I've been able to work with a team here. Our founder, Tom Driscoll, retired, and essentially I moved into that CEO owner role. I learned a lot pretty quickly on that side of things. But what stayed true the whole time is that our company has been primarily focused on helping teachers where they're at. Like, how can we help them in the classroom and identifying those challenges? So that's still what we're focused on right now. Is like, what are the challenges teachers are facing? We get feedback from them all the time. And then we design our professional learning to support that. So right now, a lot of folks have some anxiety around AI, for instance. There's a lot of opportunities, but there's also a lot of risk. There's a lot of negative aspects to student use of AI. And that is a huge challenge facing schools across the country right now. So what we try to do is help schools address that challenge. Like, how can we do some research, conduct some action research studies with them? And something that we're trying to offer more of as well is, well, two things. One is we're starting to partner with groups like the Learning Accelerator. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with TLA, but we're partnering with them where it's beyond just professional development. We'll work with them on doing research, measurement, and program evaluation. So they'll actually come in with a team. They'll research the particular problem of practice they'd like to focus on. And then we would co-design a professional learning program that focuses on particular teacher competencies, student competencies, and then we would measure the impact throughout the year to help inform future professional learning. So trying to have a more holistic impact that's more data-driven and research-based. So that's for schools that really want to go all in with a big program. On the other side, we're also going to be shifting quite a bit towards providing individual teachers with more options to engage with us. So that can be through a lot of free content that we're going to be pushing out through our blog, through this podcast, through our YouTube channel. We're going to create some more social channels with a lot of quick tutorials. So keep an eye out for that. We're starting this fall of 2024. We will be expanding that content quite a bit. Part of that will also be too, we're bringing in a lot more educators. So we have about 20 to 25 educators that will now be contributing content to EdTechTeacher. So if you're out there listening and this is something you want to get into, reach out to us because we are really interested in what teachers are sharing out there.
Yeah, I remember coming to see one of your talks. One of the first conferences I went to was listening to you, and I think it was Sean talk about citizenship and engagement. And looking at how, as a social studies teacher at the time, how we can engage students with technology and social studies classes. And I remember thinking like, yes, this is my moment. This is it. This is where I want to see the technology and the education merge together. Because when you look at technology, it's moving, speed of light, right? So we'll say it's fast. Education is not. And this education does not move quickly. It's a very slow process. There's lots of things in place that keep it slow, either on purpose or by accident, right? And to create that marriage between technology and education, it's a very delicate balance because there's a lot of external factors that we don't think about, the law
Right.
or teacher training or teacher background, comfort, classroom time, all of those things, professional development. And
Right.
it in my what I've seen in the 7 or 8 years I've been doing tech is that a group like EdTechTeacher can come in and do that work and bring those two things together seamlessly, and teachers walk out feeling comfortable. They feel like they've gained something and that they can use it immediately.
Right. And that is, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Brandon. It's not about us, it's about the teacher, right?
Mm,
So that's something that we really try to internalize is, how does a teacher feel after working with us? Right. So after you have a workshop with EdTechTeacher, after you do an online webinar, whatever it might be, like we want you coming out of our workshops feeling confident, feeling energized, feeling more competent in the skills that you have. And this is where, again, everyone has their own style. Like, and I get it. But I would always, I went through a lot of beginning of the year PD, right? I sat through as a teacher, and everybody knows like you might have that speaker that comes in and they get everybody up and they're dancing and they're singing and there's a meme a minute and everyone's laughing at like cat videos and stuff. And I get it. Like you want to have like a happy back to school thing. But for me as an educator, that always left me wanting a little bit. It's like, yeah, I'm excited, but like now what? So at EdTech Teacher, we want you to get excited about EdTech, but we also want the now what? Like we want to help you actually do this. Like when you're in the classroom, are you confident trying this out? Do you feel supported? Do you know how to get feedback? Are you comfortable trying things that don't work? Like those are all things that we really want to focus on. Is it's a little bit less about the song and dance stuff, more about like in the classroom, how can this help you get through your day? How can it help you become a better teacher? How can it help your students learn a certain competency? I am much more concerned with that than some of the other things that are out there. So when you think
mm,
about what distinguishes us from some of the other groups, I think that's it. People come to us because we really know what we're doing when it comes to instructional design. We know how schools operate. We connect with teachers, and we're about like actually changing classroom practice in a way that's helpful, as opposed to some of the other things that you may see out there.
yeah, and teachers are the hardest people to teach too.
Right.
You can see it in kids. You see it with kids that when you stand in front of a classroom and you've got the kids in front of you, if they're not engaged, you know it immediately. And the same
Yeah.
thing with teachers. If the teachers aren't buying what you're putting out there, you see it immediately. And in
Right.
some formats, they get up and walk away. They leave
Yep.
physically.
Right.
And if it's not one of those kind of formats, you see them mentally leave. You see it right on their
Mhm.
face.
Right.
And so, what has been your favorite part of working with adult learners?
It makes you really think hard about your own teaching practice,
Mm,
right? Because, like you said, sometimes adult learners are some of the hardest to teach, um, and for a lot of reasons, but partly because they are experts in the field. So you really have to one convince them that you have some authenticity and experience. I mean, how many times have you sat down in a PD and one of the first things one of the people next to you says, "Oh, I wonder when the last person that's been in the classroom, like the last time they've been in the class." You hear that all the time, right? And I get it. You have to have authenticity and show that what you know makes sense and can help them. So that's why I think it's so bad, because teachers have no time, right? I lived it. I still live it. Like your time is very valuable. So if they're going to devote any time to listening to you, to have you show them something, it's got to connect with them, or else they're going to check out. They'll write their lesson plans, they'll grade some papers, and I get it. So there's got to be extreme relevance. And what I find fascinating is a lot of PD that's provided is actually modeling really bad instruction. Right. I remember sitting through a PD day once where I had to sit in an auditorium for 3 hours just listening to some guy talk to me about de-escalation strategies. And I was thinking in my head, like, this is escalating me by having to sit here, listen to you through, go through this stuff. So I think part of it is not just the concept, like the format. Do you give people time to try things? Whenever we do a workshop, and I tell my instructors, like, you have an hour workshop with them, it might be, a third of it's kind of the what and why behind the concept, a third of it, or maybe even less, show them how to do it. Then let them try, let them practice, get in, dig in, and try it. So when we design like a full day workshop, it's not me blabbing for 6 hours. We're jumping in, we're trying things, we're doing it. right? So you need to keep teachers engaged. You have them doing things that are relevant. Just yesterday, I was working with a school, and we were learning about some new Google Classroom features. Like, build something that you will be teaching in the first couple weeks. Like, let's do something that you're already preparing for. Make it super practical for you. And I think that's what adult learners want. If I'm going to a PD session, right? Because I'm still learning myself about all different things. I don't like to sit and get either. I like to get my hands involved, to get to try things out. So I think that's another element is, just making it practical, making it active and engaged, and connecting with folks. And also being humble enough to know that, yes, we may be an expert in this particular topic, but they're the experts in their school with their kids, with their curriculum. So it's also recognizing that we all have shared expertise here. I have some things to that can provide value, but also I'm learning from you. Like, we're in this together. And I think that's where a lot of adult learning goes wrong too, is like, you'll have someone come in and it's like, I'm the expert in the room and I will tell you how to teach. Nobody wants to hear that. I don't want to hear that. If I ever come across like that, I want anybody who's listening to come up and tell me, play this clip back to me, right? Because I never want to be that type of presenter, right? Like, I am part of the education community with you, and we'll work through this. But your context, your challenges are going to be unique. So how can we meet you where you're at to help design a solution? And I think that's what effective PD should be, is meeting the teachers where they're at, what are their challenges, and how can we help them, as opposed to just telling them what they should be doing.
Yeah. And with back to school coming, as this episode is about to drop, or as you're listening to it, we've just gone back to school, your advice for new teachers right now.
Yeah. So first of all, don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
Right. Because
right.
This is a tough time for educators. It's just a challenging job, and you're probably hearing that. And you're going to experience it. Trust me. But I also think it's a very exciting time in education, and we actually need you now. We really need you now, because there are a lot of places that are struggling to find really good, high quality educators. So first of all, if you're a new educator listening to this, thank you for entering the profession. We need you. The second thing is, when it comes to EdTech, I always try to tell newer folks, like, pick your EdTech stack and keep it to like maybe 5, right? You might see some articles out there, or go to some conferences that says 50 apps in 50 minutes. I think that's ridiculous, right? No offense to people that have done sessions like that, but nobody needs 50 apps, right? So I would say start with the ecosystem of your district. So if you are a Google district, or you're working in a Google district, don't worry about 1,000 other apps. Focus on Google. Maybe do a Google level 1 certification course, do level 2, because there's so much within Google Workspace that you can leverage for EdTech that you don't even really need a whole lot else, to be honest with you. Then as you expand, my other advice would be, don't shift too often, because one, it's going to be hard to know what the impact was if you keep changing up which apps you're using. And two, it's actually really hard on the kids. It is, because you got to remember, if you're in a secondary setting, you're one of 7 teachers. If you keep switching apps on the kids, and the other teachers, like, these kids might be juggling 30 to 40 apps in one school year, which is not really fair to them either. So be very careful with the number of tools you pilot. And then my last piece is, think about not what the tool is and how you might use it. Think more about, what do I need to do with my students? What is the learning objective? What is the type of teaching I want to see? And then think backwards, which tool could help me do that? Right. So I'll just give you an example. If you want to really focus on authentic project-based learning as a new teacher, I want to do a lot of projects with my kids, I want them creating, you may want to use a tool more like Adobe Express, where it's about creating content to demonstrate understanding. On the other hand, if you're like, I really want to focus on literacy instruction, I want kids to enhance their literacy, I want to provide relevant leveled content for them. If that's the case, guess what? Express doesn't make sense, but maybe Newsela does. Right, Newsela is a tool that does adaptive text leveling with. Sorry, my camera went out. I'll just kind of go back to that for the edit. So the reason why Newsela makes sense is that it's leveled text, it's relevant, and that would match that particular instructional goal that you have with your students. But the point there is that it's not just about finding a tool and trying to jam it into all these different use cases. It's about, what are the use cases, and then find the tool that makes sense for you.
Yeah, perfect. And that's a perfect way to end here, that as a teacher, if you're going to sit down to try and integrate EdTech, keep your focus tight, right? There's tons and tons and tons of stuff out there. You can get lost in the weeds. Try and focus on what your school is using. And then maybe there's a tool you can pull in after you have a conversation with a curriculum leader or a tech director, making sure that the tool is safe. Tom, where can people find your work online?
So easiest place to go is edtechteacher.org. And all of our information is there, all of our contact info. For me personally, on social media, if you want to do a follow, it's at Tom Driscoll EDU. So I am on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And I think that the one thing I want to share with folks too is, as listeners, we are going to provide some different, incentives and ways to show our gratitude for listening. So the first thing we're going to offer is we have an AI Essentials course that we're running throughout the year. It was really popular last year. We had a few hundred educators jump in. It's a full year course where it's once a month for 90 minutes. We cover a wide variety of topics around AI, just every aspect you could think of. We have special guests come in. And what we're going to do is also offer official CEUs for it, or PDP hours and credits for teachers. We have grad credit options. And for the podcast listeners, if you put in code podcast, you get $50 off of the registration. So again, code podcast will get you the $50 off. We also have something new this year where if you want to do an accelerator course, so if you don't want to do once a month throughout the whole year, myself and Sean McCusker are co-hosting a course that's going to be 2 a month, right? So we'd actually wrap up the whole thing by December. So if you want to just get it done in the first half of the year. And then if you are listening to this and say it's already October, November, and you're getting to this episode, you can still sign up a couple ways. So one is we would provide the recordings for the first 2 sessions. The other option is we're going to run a second accelerator cohort starting in January. So if you are interested, just shoot me an email. It's actually driscoll@edtechteacher.org. Email me directly. We'll put all of this in the show notes as well, and we'll make sure that we can get you guys in there. And then an opportunity if folks want to get more involved with content development or possibly testing out some of our new services. For instance, we have a new subscription service we're going to be launching this fall. We are really eager to get feedback from teachers on the quality of it, the content, and even possibly get some new content developers. If that's something you are interested in, again, email me driscoll@edtechteacher.org. Put in the title, interested in beta testing or subscription service, and we'll make sure to get you involved with that project. We're really excited about that. We're going to launch it in the fall, and we're trying to fine tune it to make it as useful as possible for teachers. So keep an eye on that as well.
That's really great. Tom, thanks for coming on the podcast. First episode complete. Can't wait to see where this show goes.
All right. Excellent. Thanks so much, Brandon. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Tom.